whatever was happening that was good in some of these decentralized towns and, smaller cities was accelerated by the pandemic, insofar as conversations that had already started to happen between people were able to move forward in terms of saying, okay, here are our limitations, but here are our skill sets, because we've all had, beer together and scones together and created zombie apocalypse film festivals together. We know who knows, we know how to put a sound system together outside. We know how to put up a tent. We know how to create, humorous things. We know how to regulate, change the town zoning so that we can bump out the sidewalk into the main street, which is really hard in a place where you don't have that kind of civic conversation. I mean, that's like tons of red tape. But, there are places that said, we already found each other by working on garlic festivals and science programming together. So we know how to go to the mayor and say, dude or dudette, you must let us put this barrier in the middle of the thing so that people can sit in what was formerly Main Street and eat. It was almost like the pandemic rewarded those who had already ventured out of their doors and found ways to get past their social oogliness to figure out how to do things together. And I always flinch at the words like, why can't we all just get along and work together and stuff? You can't just do that out of nowhere. It has to. It's an accumulation. But for those who had accumulated conversations where they said like, I don't like that person, but I trust that person. Like, I don't like that person, but that person knows how to run a sound system. Those places were rewarded. And yes, they were not in the major cities, but the book that I wrote was inclusive of the major cities, because there are ways that people in cities also figure out how to know who does what so that they can do the good stuff.
As somebody who lives in Queens, as somebody who stayed in the city for various reasons throughout the pandemic, I saw a lot of friends and colleagues and people generally leave the city. I saw a lot of people, myself included, questioning whether it's necessary to do the work that I do to continue to live in a place like New York, and whether the trade-offs of being stuck in a one-bedroom apartment throughout the pandemic were necessarily worth it during a time when there was just nothing to do aside from watch Netflix, which anyone can do at any place. There is this acceleration of decentralization from the standpoint of people are leaving cities and moving to towns, to a certain extent, at least.
There's a guy named Richard Florida. He's really like the preeminent urbanist and kind of person who's just talking about these kinds of shifts. He created the term the creative class, and there's a bit of an issue. It's funny because people don't like the word class, so it's tough.
Americans, they not only hate it but have no concept of class generally. I think
they feel a little allergic to it because they associate it with caste, which we're really realizing, and in a lot of ways for good reason. But that said, a lot of people pushed past the terminology to see the value of what he was talking about. And he said, there are 3 T's. There's tech, talent, and technology, talent, and tolerance. And he said, any place that has those 3 things going on will thrive. You need tolerance, meaning people who get outside of the boxes of restriction from, various restrictive ideologies, particularly the various churches. And, talent, of course, many different kinds of talent. And then technology, people willing to embrace that. And, all those words that you people use in Queens now, like disruptible and stuff like that.
I'm a tech journalist, so it's even worse than that. I'm at the tip of that spear, Dar.
Well, then I might call you and ask for some advice and some elucidation. But so it was interesting because the other thing that he talked about was how spiky things have gotten, meaning you'll have these places, whether it's New York City or San Francisco or Singapore, where you just have such a confluence of, really sophisticated tech embrace, but also sophisticated tolerance, is a weird word, inclusion, and also kind of the nightlife that draws younger folks who like a little excitement in their life. There are only certain kinds of places that have that. And so therefore we're getting very spiky in terms of all of the talent and the money and the tech and all that cool stuff going to these little places, and then these small cities losing out. Well, dot dot dot. And this because you're a tech journalist. Suddenly, people have figured out how to do remote learning, remote communication, remote, all of that stuff. John Kerry, Senator Kerry, said, we've made 10 years of progress in 6 months. Like, all the tech was there, but now we use it. So, that's number one. And then number two, we were stuck in our towns, and we discovered, I was up in northern Vermont 5 years ago, and all these kids came in with their like hoodies, and they were all kind of pale. And I thought, oh, I know what's going on. These are a bunch of really depressed kids who are in like dead end lives, and they're not happy, and they're at this bar to drink and medicate. No, there was like a karaoke thing, and they blasted. I mean, these kids just, that's all they needed on Saturday night. They just had this major karaoke thing. And it wasn't Alice Tully Hall, but it was something to do. And a lot of places, as simple as it sounds, found out how to create something to do that could either be sort of humorous and hokey, or kind of, like Broadway in the burbs. So those things have changed. And I think Richard Florida is probably feeling very happy about this, because he really kind of eulogizes the, he's very sad that you have all of this talent going to one place, and all of that life and all of that, sparkle being in this little place and not being in the smaller places. I've been noticing that the smaller places have been getting their groove for a long time. You are right that the pandemic got people to up their game, and they realized their game was there.
I grew up in the Bay Area, and I always dreamed of moving to not just a place like New York, but New York specifically for work and for other reasons. And I think that there is, I mean, that's natural, right? That's sort of a natural inclination for teenagers, like to want to get out of this town and to uproot themselves and move to a new place. And obviously you are somebody who, by nature of your job, travels around a lot. How much of the impulse of sort of building up these places is an attempt to kind of get people to stay put?
All right, you've totally outed me, because there's a part of me that sees, if people can be more interested in where they are, and be more cool and resilient and sophisticated about where they are, and they get less they fetishize going there, wherever there is, less. you know there are a few great things that can happen. One, fossil fuel footprint. You're not needing to fly off to this place with the turquoise water, and this place with the giant waterfall. You suddenly discover that you have your own waterfall in your backyard. So, like, a great example is in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania, where the Blob was partially filmed there in the 50s. The great Blob,
The original.
the horrendous acting, I must say. I mean, but like,
not by the Blob. The Blob was great.
yeah, no, the Blob was good. Actually, the Blob really showed up, and Steve McQueen was really good. But there's like the scene where he goes into a theater and he says, "Hey guys, you got to know something," and his acting is good, but all of his friends are like reading off of cue cards, and they're saying, "Shh, man, stop. We're trying to watch a movie." And he's like, "You don't understand. There's this blob and it's coming out." And they're like, "Really, man, we want to watch the movie." And then the blob starts to come through the ventilation system. So they figured out in Phoenixville, which was a town that was, post steel, a Rust Belt town. Well, I would say despairing would be a better, like shadow economy, drugs, sex trade, not legal economy. They discovered that since the Blob had been partially filmed in their town, and in the theater that they had revived and bought for $1 and were playing movies in, that they could have a Blob Fest where they would show the Blob in the theater the Blob is in, and turn it into a whole thing called the Blob Fest. And now it's like this big science fiction weekend. I was there for a Godzilla weekend. So they bring in like these sci-fi writers and stuff. And everybody wants to live in Phoenixville now, and that declogs all of that concentrated population in one place. And now people want to live. And if you live in Philadelphia, You want to make a day trip. You don't have to go to Paris because, why would you go to Paris? You've got Blobfest coming up in the summer. And at the end of the year, you have the Firebird Festival where they burn a phoenix because it's Phoenixville, which is also very meaningful and very interesting. So there's a part of me that says decentralize the fascination of who you are, where we are. Also, take that as an example that no one can be everywhere all at once. Democracy looks like this. You do this thing, they do this thing. We all have mosaic tiles that fit into a big picture, and we can have faith in each other that each town is kind of doing some fun, chugging along historical, cultural thing.
You're absolutely right from the very urgent concerns around climate change and carbon footprint. But, at least traditionally, travel has always been such an important part of expanding your horizons and actually getting out there, meeting new people, seeing new places, immersing yourself in new cultures. And, there's a certain degree of that can happen online, but it's still a pretty bad facsimile for actually getting out there and going to a new place.
I don't know if you're like me. I think about this all the time. First of all, cities, if you're talking footprint, cities are completely where it's at. You're all jammed together. As I read a book called The Green Metropolis, where the author was writing about the vertical commute. You commute up 20 stories and you walk 3 blocks to get there, and then you vertically commute down to get your lunch. And so there's nothing like a city. And the concentration of what you can learn about yourself and the world within a city block, and all the immigrant communities coming and thinking about the world and the way the world comes to you, like no comparison. So I love cities. I'm very pro city, but I also love the way that if you're living in a town, you can feel good and cool and like you are where you're supposed to be. And the aspiration isn't that someday you're going to have to go to the city if you really want to be a full person. It's funny because as a folk singer, I lived at the cross section of 2 highways. So this was like, I was 40 minutes away from a very accessible airport with $9 parking, 24, like these were my necessities. And I was at the 91 and 90, cross whatever. So I could go to Ohio, Boston, Maine, New York, all equidistant. And I was actually in a better position than I would have been if I lived in a city. So I did get to see how people figured out how to keep on growing their brains. But you're right. Like, I want my kids to travel. I feel like I've traveled enough. I don't necessarily have to go back to Australia to tour anymore. Like, I saw it, really cool, fantastic birds in all the trees, feral cats, the best coffee I've ever had. However, did it, expanded from it. And I wish that for everybody. I wish that there was a way to narrow the fossil fuel the footprint of that. But maybe one compromise is for, places in Ohio that are the birthplace of this rock star or this, or the blob, that they can find the blob, their inner blob, and also say, like, we're not flyover country, which is such an offensive term. Nothing is flyover country because we created, because we're the birthplace of Michael Jordan or whatever. I really wish that for people so that they don't feel forgotten and then become totalitarian fascists, which is another concern.
Do you still feel a sense of obligation doing what you do, and that you're somebody with a fan base, to at some point in the future travel to Australia, these places where people want to see you and where you haven't been in a while? Surely you want to continue to kind of get out in front of as many people as possible, or at least give those people the opportunity to come see you who haven't had it in the past.
Yeah. What's the word? Metrics. It's like all the metrics. Because, there is a question, like, if I only play in, Kentucky, then other people have to drive a gazillion miles if they really want to come see a live concert. But so I do get out, but I've also tried to, I think I lucked out. I took 2 trains. I was on a tour, a cruise boat. So, which is something that, it's kind of, I feel funny about, but I was on a cruise ship. And I'm like surrounded by people who are teachers and social workers and psychologists. Like, they do God's work all year long, and then they take this one cruise. And it's filled with all of my friend musicians and fun things. So I took a train down to the cruise instead of flying. and slept on the train, and I took pictures all along the way, and it expanded me as a person. It was such a good thing to do. I was basically saying, hopefully without any guilt, like, but saying, I took a train. It's the most fuel efficient and least subsidized transportation in our country. And we need to give it our love and our attention. And Amtrak, who is a person, of course, wrote back to me throughout my whole posting, like, thanks, Dar.
Joe Amtrak.
Yeah, Joe. And then I took an Amtrak down to a tour that I did in the South. And I think that actually saved my life because it was at the beginning of COVID when people were like, man, this is like really serious. But if I'd gone to LaGuardia and then to the Atlanta International Airport, I would have gotten COVID. It was like the very beginning of March. So taking a train saved my life. I've said taking a train is a really interesting way to be in the country and see the country and understand its history and speculate about its future. And let's all do that. I have friends who've been very panicked about the environment, and they're really guilt trippy, and that doesn't work for anybody. So, so no, I do travel around, but I actually try to do as little. I have a national tour coming up, and we've gotten it down to 1.5 flights, like one round trip and a and a one way, and everything else I'm driving.
Wait, so you were on a cruise ship that close to the beginning of the pandemic?
On the cruise ship, there was a news story about the cruise ship that had been grounded and not able, and I was like, this is like a problem. And the way that we dealt with it and breathed through it as we were heading home to the home port where we were going to get off was to say, well, that's California and that's closer to that Pacific Rim. That's closer to Asia. It's more a West Coast problem right now. It hadn't reached New York, but we all knew it was all about to hit the fan. Last helicopter out of Saigon. I mean, we were probably the last cruise ship to dock before they said enough. And we knew it.
Aside from that very scary experience of watching that unfold in real time, how is the cruise ship experience for you? There are certain stigmas attached to going on a cruise ship. It was a good experience for you?
Here's the thing. It's, you feel like if you pulled a certain curtain back here and there, you would sort of see an industry that's not very well regulated in terms of the labor force. And yet you would also hear about things that were done as a compensation so that, some people from various countries, this was actually an okay thing in terms of, equality and justice and social justice, because this was an industry that people could get involved with as a step into other things, so you kind of kept on telling yourself that it was cool. But the other thing, and they talked about ways that they were being fuel efficient and energy efficient. And, but the other thing is that, it's a week, and the people that I would see had like those t-shirts with a picture of a wolf on them, or they would say like, science teacher 5K run for neurodiversity. Like everybody had a t-shirt or something that was a branding of an incredible cause where they stepped out of their lives to or stepped into their lives to be as inclusive and forward looking as possible for the environment, for for Black Lives Matter, for ahead of the curve stuff, because that's the music that world that I'm a part of. People were kind to each other, they were kind to me, they were so happy to like put up their feet. And then you would stop in places. My manager and I went to a spice plantation, as it's called, in Belize, and bought a whole bunch of spices because that's what you got to do at the end of. And it was so fantastic. I was so grateful. I was like, I've never seen cinnamon growing on a cinnamon tree. I've never seen vanilla beans hanging from a vanilla bean bush. Like, I took it in and said, I'm a cooler person because I got to see this. And so I did my best to be a good tourist. It's a very interesting world. I wouldn't say I wouldn't do it again if the footprint were a little better. I'd feel better about doing it. But I learned a lot about the world from being on the cruise.
I've seen a trend over the last like several years of these targeted cruises.
Yeah.
Almost like subcultural cruises. They'll be a lot more curated than a traditional cruise of just sort of like
Right.
random like off Broadway entertainment, and actually be a genre, or
Right.
maybe it's like a Comic-Con on a cruise. Was that the setting? It was
Yeah.
folk fans?
It was I did 2 different kinds. One was called Cayamo, which is, more sort of Southern Americana, but they let a few Northern folks like me in, and the
Okay.
other was the Melissa Etheridge cruise. And, Melissa Etheridge fans, I mean, they are basically, the middle school algebra teachers. I mean, these are the people who do the most wonderful, democracy-saving work, and a lot of them were pioneers and in all sorts of for both feminists and for orientation and also for the trans world, so and Melissa Etheridge herself is fantastic, really great person, so like the whole thing felt good, like we all know that we're going to come back into port into a world that's filled with storm clouds, and maybe because we went to these islands like Antigua and the Cayman Islands and to Belize and places, maybe we'll know them better when we see them on the news and we see those hurricanes going through, and we'll our hearts will go out a little bit more. There wasn't this kind of like, what can the world do for me? There was like, how can I engage with the world and see the music I want to see? So no, the Kayamo people are very, it's called Six Man. They got it going on. And also I never felt like I was being treated like a cog. And I have been part of big things where they're like, here's your meal tickets, Dan. It's like, oh, it's Dar. I'm actually a woman, but okay, thanks for the drink tickets.
Like a massive festival or something where you're basically anonymous.
Yeah, I won't name the one place that's basically become a franchise concert venue thing, but basically whenever you go in there, you don't really feel special. And that's okay because I just take my check and go. But Six Man, those cruises, like, they make you feel like family by the end.
I think the flip side of that, and the thing that would, I guess, be cause for concern for me in the lead up to it, is as somebody with like a certain degree of social anxiety, if I was a notable personality who is, I mean, you are confined
Mhm, mhm.
in this cruise for a week or so with people who know who you are. Is it difficult feeling like you have to be basically on for a week?
You know, Here's the thing, flip it and think about how it was okay. So what does that say about that kind of audience that they cultivated and that I have? Because I thought, okay, this sounds horrendous, but I I mean, just the not having a choice part. You can hide in your room the whole time, and there are people who do that.
Hmm.
But I actually liked going out and, like, there were places where you could eat that where the audiences didn't go. I didn't do that. I totally went into the place and sat down with folks and talked with them, and they were so cool. And so maybe the fact that I had the escape hatch always, allowed me
Just
to do
knowing
that.
it was there was useful.
Yeah. But, if I felt like I was walking around in a bathing suit with, like, I mean, there's certain bathing suits I wouldn't walk around in, like I wouldn't want that much scrutiny. But I also felt like I could go out without my makeup in the morning and do my thing. And the love was in the room, as my record company used to say.
I mean, on the subject of being confined for an extended period of time, how have you fared for the past year and a half?
It was a time. It was almost like my life was this huge room of files, all of these experiences and thoughts and things that I meant to think about and figure out and organize in my mind. Um, there I was in that room having to do that, and it was uh, it was really meaningful. It was. My manager is this fantastic woman who's like really energetic. So she just said, I found someone. She knows tech. She's going to set you up. You have to get this microphone. You have to get this mixer. You have to get these chords and you have to get this schedule and you have to get this mindset. And I was like, cuz I can just like stare at my hands and like grow, tomatoes and just think about stuff and take long walks. She's like, "Yeah, no, that's not going to happen." It's I've heard people who've had autism who talk about the part of their treatment being like people forcing them to interface in certain ways that don't feel comfortable, and then having the safety of not having to do that, and they can kind of come back. So that was my pandemic year. My manager forced me to embrace all this tech, which I'm sure is laughable to you, but was really like psychologically fraught. So I learned all this new stuff. I taught songwriting online, which now I can do. Like I added all this stuff to my world. I also figured out how to clean my refrigerator coils, which is like super simple, and how to consolidate all my vegetarian dishes so that I could become a vegetarian again. And I took long walks that were filled with like giant seabirds. Like we have a lot of emboldened wildlife around here after that pandemic. And I would even venture to say in Queens, you have it too. They definitely came out and started strutting their stuff, and flapping into our neighborhood the way they had not before. The nightlife around here it's filled with hooting and wooting. And so it was good in that way. And it was, I focused what I want, like the decades ahead to look like during this time. I turned myself around in some ways.
Would you and have you, I guess, traditionally had an issue self motivating if you don't have somebody there pushing you a little bit?
Well, no, it's more like I know what I'm supposed to do, like I'm supposed to be getting ready for this tour, and I'm supposed to be writing a song for this, and I have the schedule to, do an interview or go in and record something, and that's just what I do. And I'm in my 50s now, so I don't have to do as much of that, and I can call the shots, and there's not that kind of 200 gigs a year and then 200 interviews and 200 people giving you a guilt trip if you don't do it right because you don't know what you're doing. So I was already like a little less spazzy. I just had this kind of, well, this is what I do. I get on this plane, I do this, I get that. And I was already doing that, getting on a train and trying to be more creative. But on some level, it's like you don't have a choice about any of this. And when we booked this fall, because I'm releasing this album, it's a lot. And I thought, I don't want to, this isn't, I don't want to get back to business as usual. So I think a lot of people had that moment, like more than I did. I mean, I'm like, okay, I could easily just like get a a rainbow assortment of Crocs, garden my ass off, and like put patches on my patches and start, doing like online concerts and thinking that I was going to make ends meet because I just eat a bunch of basil from my garden. I decided no. What I do is I get out there and I do it. And it's, I have children who probably would benefit more from my being home more, but I'm going to be that person again. But you know what? It's not the same. I'm not on a treadmill anymore.
I know you've dealt with some depression in the past, as probably a lot, or even
Yeah.
most of us have at some point. And for many people, I think myself certainly included to some degree, a lot of what we've been able to sort of silence with all of the noise going on with our lives and all of the forward momentum that we've been able to achieve as just a part of being out of the world and working, it's been possible to keep that at bay. Have you had any difficulty with that in amongst all of the sort of slowness and silence of the past year and a half?
I think that's such a good layered question, because I was with my kids who are wonderful. And so I didn't, a lot of it was just trying to figure out how to help everybody cope and myself. So in a way it was busy, and it was almost like learning a new skill set. So number one. And also, they say that sometimes boredom, what we call boredom, and I think boredom and depression have a very similar feel to them, is really, and somebody figured this out for me. It's kind of this weird FOMO, this weird fear of missing out, where you feel like everybody else is doing something and you don't know what to do with yourself because you're supposed to do this thing that these people are doing. And I think for some people, the pandemic took that anvil off of their shoulders where they're like, nobody's doing anything. So when do I want to wake up? What do I want to eat? What do I want to do with my body and my mind? Because maybe I do want to watch a lot of Netflix. That's what everybody else is doing. And I think that it existentially took some pressure off. And I was happy to see people just say, instead of people being like, well, I learned Spanish, I learned Italian today, I learned that, they were like, I don't know, I don't really know what I did today. I just looked around, but it was an okay day. And I thought, thank you. We need more being, you know. We need more people feeling comfortable with being, because I had to make that peace after my, big suicidal ideation, clinical depression thing. So I liked watching people kind of catching up with that peace of mind and self acceptance. So that's another way it wasn't. But yes, the third thing is when you have to. I got back to Buddhism, and what's hilarious is that we were racing around trying to find a name for my album, and one of the lyrics is "I'll meet you here," and I said, I was thinking about "I'll meet you here," and the record company said that's the one that we want. And it's funny because that was what the year taught me. Instead of saying something bad happened, what did I do wrong? This is proof that I'm a failure. This is proof that I should have read more books, written more songs, been smart. I say better, stronger, faster, sooner. You know, Instead of meeting reality like that, just saying happiness doesn't mean happy. Happiness is just you're someone gave you this opportunity to be alive, and sometimes that's a flat tire. And yes, I should have learned how to fix a flat tire. but this is the reality. I'll just meet it here instead of taking it so personally. So I think it helps some of my residual depression stuff, because like a lot of technology has gone wrong.
As it did at the beginning of this interview.
Right, right. As opposed to like what's wrong with me, it's like, oh, this is what's happening right now. And I'm starting to really kind of get farther down into that. So I wish for everybody that they can take this as a jump off point to something better, and not a complete panic that they had to just look in the mirror and they couldn't look anywhere else.
So you mentioned Buddhism. What is the relationship between "I'll meet you here" and "be here now"?
Well, oh, you know what? Actually, I think there is a difference, because be here now is kind of, I think, what I was aspiring for, this kind of like present moment, present moment. And there's a lot of that. But I think I'll meet you here is more like, what fresh hell is this? Like, oh, wow, this fell apart. Oh, and this fell apart right next to it. Like, I could have dealt with one jolt today, but I got five. All right, that's what happened. And for me, be here now was always like the crowd that was espousing that. I listened to one of the Be Here Now lectures, but I didn't read any books called Be Here Now.
But abstractly, the idea is clear, right?
Right,
Be
right.
present.
And I almost feel like it's like, carpe diem, and now let me give you this inappropriate massage, and now all of a sudden, like, we wake up and like, what just happened? Whoa, well, I guess I was here now, and
Embrace the discomfort, I guess, in a way.
like, and also like an excuse for things that will lead to discomfort. Whereas I'll meet you here is more like, I have this idea about what I'm supposed to do with my life. I wake up in the morning and I start on that path, but then somewhere I get a little like anxiety attack because it's not quite what I thought it was going to be. And then I just make peace. Like, my new motto is just like, I made progress today. Like, maybe it was a little bit of weeding, maybe it was, finding an old recipe. Like, it's never what I expect it to be, but something happened, and I went a little forward. It was somehow generative. And lowering the bar saved my like saved it transformed me. Because every day something awesome happens, and I stopped saying what I thought that awesome thing should be. And I don't know, I feel pretty off the hook now. It's good. But that's not but Be Here Now is, I don't know, it's more like an amoeba. Like, for me, it's more like I'm like in my little spaceship going forward, and then I hit turbulence and have to get the warp speed up to speed, and like I'm trying to guide the ship, but I hit turbulence. Be Here Now is kind of more like an amoeba to me. And we're probably both going to hear from people who are like, she totally got it wrong. But
I like the phrase residual depression that you used earlier. I don't know that I've heard it described exactly like that, but that it makes sense to me, in the sense that, does having dealt with depression mean that you kind of have to be not resigned, but resolved to the fact that, who is it? Was it Samuel Johnson or Ben Johnson who called it the black dog of depression? That to a certain extent, it's always going to kind of be around the corner.
Yeah, I know that, and he was probably going from Samuel Johnson or something. Winston Churchill called it his little black dog. So it was, and he was talking to a relative. He's like, "Oh, us Churchills, we've got this thing in our blood." He really recognized it as a sort of a physical thing, and a, a brain chemical thing. And he said, "Oh, you have to deal with your little black dog. Oh, we've got the little black dog." And I think that's extremely helpful to sort of say, I have this. There's two there are two or three paths coming out of this. Like for me, it happened when I was 20. I mean, I was on a big lead up to it hitting full force when I was 21. And I had some fundamental misunderstandings about what life is. And I encourage people who feel this thing that I call, who lack the drive to be alive. That's what I call it. If you lack, which is also called suicidal ideation, I realize if you lack the
Yeah.
drive to be alive and you just kind of think that being alive is somewhat absurd and not worth it and easily knocked down, there's something wrong with you. And so it's important to figure out if you have a fundamental misunderstanding, because what you're probably going to discover is a pocket of extreme anger, rage, loathing, injustice, that is important to barf out. And so I barfed out a bunch, not literally. That was not, those are other people's problems.
Those are other struggles. Yeah.
Yes, yes, not mine, but certainly friends. But I got out all of this rage and anger and worked on it. And people who had a lot of power, I suddenly saw them as human and was able to, de-escalate that and find my own power and find my own, like I did a senior thesis play that was horrendous, but I was like, oh, this is horrendous, but I'm learning because I'm a human and that's what happens. Like I don't have to die because I did this embarrassing thing. And so, there's some fundamental things that happen when you're first dealing with that really elemental depression, and that burned off and never came back. And and then there's like the residual stuff. Like I was listening to Brene Brown, and we can all benefit from just tracking down Brene Brown. And she said, she said something illuminating to me, at 50. So here I am 30 years past the suicidal ideation, but she said there's embarrassment, humiliation, guilt, and shame. And the first three are things that you find yourself in situationally, and that's going to happen. Shame is actually feeling like there's something wrong with who you are,
Mm.
and we should not have shame. And when I heard that, I thought, "Ooh, that's like weeds in a garden. That I have to weed that out because, sometimes you're caught with your pants down in the public square and you think there's something desperately wrong with me as opposed to, oh, I wore the wrong belt." And that's just human. But for those of us with the brain chemicals of a little black dog, it's more important for us to value the separating embarrassment, guilt, humiliation from this thing called shame. I don't know about you. I have friends who say they don't even know what shame is. I'm like, "Yee."
This has always been a weird disconnect for me. Like I considered myself to be a fairly introverted person from the standpoint, like the cruise ship conversation about like having
Yeah.
difficulty talking to strangers, but like obviously I can talk to you on here, or I can go on TV, I can do all these things. It's not really an issue. So there is a disconnect, and I'm sure doing what you do, a lot of extroverts, or certainly a lot of performers, a lot of people who really do a great job of getting out there. I don't know, maybe from the outside there seems to be a disconnect between being somebody who's anxious and being somebody who can give their entire self to somebody on a record or on stage.
Here's the thing. I think that the pandemic actually introduced us to this part of ourselves that I call the introvert, which is
Mm.
we can totally do things. I mean, you live in the city, right? So you're working it and you have to deal with people all the time. And but it's the introvert is the person who can function as an extrovert, but who really benefits from and loves introverted time. And um, so I'll say that. The other thing is that I have a lot of entertainment friends who have social anxiety disorder. And some of it came from a friend of mine was on a show in a foreign country and she messed up on a TV show. And she got off and she was expecting, in the United States, you have this team and they're like, it wasn't so bad. Oh, I couldn't even tell. Oh, who cares? Oh, it happens to everybody. Oh, we'll fix it in post op or something. She was in a country that didn't operate that way. And the whole team met her and humiliated her and said, that wasn't okay. You did something wrong. Everybody makes mistakes. But they said, you did something wrong and it's not okay.
Mm.
And my friend has social anxiety. She can't do anything without a teleprompter now. She can't go into certain situations. There's certain ways that you can't photograph her, you know, so a lot of performers have social anxiety disorder, and they just have to really figure out how to control their environment so they don't feel completely debilitated by the externals.
But is there a disconnect between I don't feel worthy and I feel like I have something to say or something to tell people, and I feel like I should be out there? Are these hard things to reconcile?
Uh, well, I'm pretty social. I mean, I think I remember, there's a story about me being on a bus when I was 5 years old, and that the bus driver, I came home and I said, the bus driver's name is Lou. And I said, I was afraid of him because I was the only one on the bus and he's scary because he had a mustache, it's the 70s. And so I was afraid of him. So I asked him his name and I decided to talk with him so that he wouldn't be scary to me. I thought, as opposed to like hiding underneath my seat. And I said, what's your name? And he said, you. And I said, my name? Oh, it's Dar. And he said, you. And I said, oh, it's Dar. And he said, Lou. So there are all these stories of me being able to be social as a way to cope. However, um, uh, yeah. Hmm. Let me regroup for a second, think for a second.
So there's a social question, which we were talking about, and then there's a question of, again, your depression manifesting itself in such a way where you feel like you're not necessarily worthy.
Right. No, no, you're right. Okay. So what's interesting is, I lead a songwriting retreat, and I've been thinking a lot about like how I talk about songwriting, and there's something that I call the yonder star, which is like these people are brilliant and you're not. But if you stare at them and think about them enough, maybe you might have some iota, might just that little brilliance might reflect on you and you might be. And that's not how I operate. And I try to get interested in stuff so I don't even have a choice. I'm like so interested in doing something that I just do it. I mean, and I
Maybe it's songwriting, maybe it's urban planning, maybe it's a YA book.
right. And so and even if it means I have to get out there in a ridiculous clown car, I get so excited about something that I'm willing to do it. And at this age, I'm used to the idea that it's going to require some level of fear or fear of being ridiculous, that's just going to go with the territory, and that everybody has that. And like something really humiliating happened to me in my town about 7 years ago that had to do with Roger Ailes, which was horrendous.
To be fair, most things having to do with Roger Ailes are
Oh
horrendous.
no, well, he had his strategies, and I spoke with a friend of mine who's actually a congressman now. His name is Jamie Raskin, and I was just dealing with this part of my brain called the amygdala, I came to learn, which is that mammalian part of your brain that's so afraid that you're going to be put to the edge of the herd and you're going to be picked off by the cheetah. Like I'm different and that's bad. And Roger was great at finding that part of your brain and making you feel different and bad in your own community. And so Jamie said, well, the guy who, on whom Hotel Rwanda was based, came and spoke in DC, and he was asked, why do you think other people didn't do more the way you did more? And he said, well, I realized that everyone feels ashamed of something and they feel like they can't do something heroic because they have something to be ashamed of. And he said, and once I realized that everybody feels that way, then I just stepped in, because then why not me? It really helped me when Jamie said that, and it really helped me understand sometimes why it's hard to come out with new artwork and step into the public sphere with a book about urban planning or whatever. Everyone's prone to feel very ashamed or think they have a shameful secret. So if everybody feels that way, then everybody should just get out there and, hang the freak flag.
Maybe it's overstated now, but I'm glad people are having conversations around, as much as it's a buzzword in the zeitgeist, imposter syndrome, because I think that is, a very real thing that people deal with. I assume, or would hope at this point in your very long career, that you have confidence in yourself as a songwriter to such a point where you can, write books about it and teach people how to do it. Given all the scholarship that already exists with urban planning, it must have been difficult to sort of put yourself in that sphere.
Yeah, yeah. I remember I was sitting on my porch step and I said, "Mom," I called my mom, and we were about to do the rounds of finding out if I could get a publisher for this. And I said, "Mom, I've been talking about this for a while now. Is this a thing?" And she said, "Yes, it's a thing." And I know this sounds ridiculous, and a lot of people don't have their moms around, but that was a real help when my mom's like, "It's a thing, honey." Um, and it was also, um, yeah, it was important enough to me. I was so, I was so freaked out by people saying, "Why can't we all just get along? Why are we so divided?" I was like, first of all, I travel all over the place. We're not that divided. People totally figure out ways. And in fact, the language of division is a way to divide people, to make them feel like, I learned that from Roger Ailes. Roger Ailes is Fox News, and what he did was basically the equivalent of a person standing at the foot of your bed with a megaphone in the morning saying, "I want you to remember every embarrassing, stupid thing you did yesterday and every achievement you never achieved, and build on that and not even bother getting out of bed." Like, that's what, forget the fact that Fox News is Republican. It's the tactic of disempowering people and making them feel like there's dangerous people everywhere who want to kill you, and there's a system that's out to destroy you and to dismantle you, and that also, if you step out, they will humiliate you and single you out. There's a lot of singling out. So I was so sick of hearing people using the language that, pointed to people and said, "This is a bad person and we are divided and we suck and nobody gets along." Because I saw people figuring out how to do stuff all over the country, in Iowa, in Wisconsin, in Nevada, having fun, trusting each other, having community reads. Yeah, I think I just couldn't stand it any longer. And I said, this is how they do it. They don't hug, they don't kiss, they don't get in a big circle and sing, but they have garlic festivals where they figure out, oh, this guy, he's got a little OCD, but he's a great sound guy. So don't, wash your hands before you go near him and don't try to touch him, but he's an awesome sound guy. So now we can do this. I kept on seeing the ways that people organize themselves socially and thrived. And yeah, I felt like somebody's got to write about this. And I decided that I had enough field experience to do it, which is not what a lot of urban planners have. I mean, I'm the one who's been to, Twin Peaks Falls in, Washington State, and the cherry festivals in Michigan. And, I've done all that stuff.